Welcome to Module 3, Project Rationale, of the CDOT Fiscal Year 2015 Grant Application Technical Assistance modules. During this module, you will receive some information that will be helpful in writing your Project Rationale section of your CDOT grant application. Module 3 continues a conversation from Module 2, Problem Identification, and so I have with me here Jan, and this is Lindsay, and we are going to just kind of continue the role play that we started with a county called Fake County and continue to build out our grant application. So if you haven't seen Module 2, you may want to go back and review that one before starting this rationale module if you need to get a little background about Fake County and the problems that we identified. Before we get started, Jan, I thought, the first thing that we should do is take a look at the guidance for the application. So I'm going to click to that now. So you can see here that the project rationale section is worth 10 points. This isn't a ton of points, but it is a really important section because it's going to set up the entire rationale that you'll use for the objective section, the collaboration section, the evaluation section. So even though this isn't worth the most points of any section, we want to pay really close attention to it to make sure that we have a good approach laid out to then create our objectives and goals and activities that we're going to be working on. So here you can see in the instructions that you want to briefly describe the specific approach you will use to address the problem you identified in the problem identification section, and the program proposed must be an evidence-based countermeasure. And then it references here the NHTSA countermeasures that work document. So I think it would be a good idea to go and take a look at that for sure. It also looks like, because I've looked at the countermeasures that work document in the past, it looks like they've pulled right into this application instructions the actual rating system for the countermeasures that work. Jan, can you walk us through what these rating systems mean?
Sure. In the countermeasures that work document, they use a star rating system to demonstrate the effectiveness of different strategies. And so you'll see that strategies with a 5-star are proven to be effective by several high-quality evaluations with consistent results. So this is more of like the gold standard approach and what works best. The strategies that are given 4 stars have demonstrated to be effective in certain situations. 3 stars are likely to be effective based on balance of evidence from high-quality evaluations or other sources. The 2 stars are undetermined in their effectiveness. Different methods of implementing the countermeasure produce different results. And the 1 stars have limited or no high-quality evaluation evidence. The one thing to keep in mind is that in order to get these effectiveness ratings, you have to be implementing quality programs and following the strategies as they were evaluated.
So I think that's really helpful. I do see a note in here that priority will be given to proposals that use ratings with 3, 4, or 5 stars, and that 1-star approaches aren't really acceptable. I did talk to CDOT, and they said that 1-star approaches for certain things are definitely one of the options, and many grantees have been picking 1-star approaches in the past. What they said is it's acceptable as long as your 1-star activity is accompanied by one of the other higher star ratings. So you may have something in your proposal that has a strategy that's in the 1-star category, but you're also doing stuff at the 3-star, 4-star, or 5-star category as well. So it's more of a supplement than a standalone project.
Some of the areas don't seem like they have 5-star evaluations, or they're really hard to do. What do we do in that situation?
I think we really have to, in that situation, try to make the best case. If it's at all possible, this even says that a lot of strategies to reduce motor vehicle injuries and deaths involve policies or systems, and I think that's really hard to think about at the local level because, we're not responsible for passing laws, and we actually already have, like for young drivers, which is the focus of our project in Fake County, we actually have, already have a graduated driver's license law. So I don't really know that it's very easy to do, but it indicates here right in the instructions that activities related to policy may include identifying partnerships and with key stakeholders to address support for policy changes, and really to be working with our decision makers and educating about even enforcing the laws we have. So I think if some of the one-star strategies that are really more programmatic at the local level can be supported by also looking at, some of the policy strategies, we may have some success there.
Okay. What about if we don't use the countermeasures that work document? Do you think we could use the CDC's community guide?
I think that would work to use the community guide. It's not specifically mentioned here, but I'm pretty familiar with that, and actually at one time did a crosswalk between the countermeasures that work and the community guide. And even though they present things a little differently, the strategies that they rate highly and those that they say really aren't recommended are very close.
Okay.
So I think the important thing here is to really justify and show that we have an evidence base for this program and that we're able to really move forward. I also saw here in the evaluation criteria that we really want to make sure that whatever we pick, even if we use a different sort of evidence-based listing or something, that it really does somehow tie to the NHTSA countermeasures that work, because 5 points of this section, so half of this section, is going to be scored related to the number of star strategies. So if we pick a 5-star strategy, we will receive 5 points, 4-star 4 points, and so on and so forth. So if we get something that's not listed at all on here, it looks like we'll receive 0 points for this section.
Okay, so we definitely need to tie it to the countermeasures that work.
I think that that's what we have to do for sure. The other thing that I was kind of curious about is this webinar that is listed here, an evidence-based and best practice motor vehicle interventions. So why don't we take a view of that, or even just a small section of that now, to kind of see what that webinar is all about, and maybe that'll give us some guidance to move forward.
Okay.
So what does it mean to implement best practice strategies at the local level? What we know to be true of effective programs are that they, number one, provide infrastructure and support to staff to do the work. Unfunded programs who do not have staff with dedicated time focused on their initiatives are not likely to be successful or have sustainability long term. Number two, effective programs use and collect quality local data to drive priorities. Number three, coalitions or local partnership support. Most of us cannot implement successful programs in isolation of other initiatives occurring within the community. So many injury issues are multidimensional, and implementing one aspect of injury prevention may also have a domino effect in other areas. Number four, effective programs implement evidence-based or best practice interventions or strategies. And we'll explain that just a little bit more in a moment. And number five, you include an evaluation plan to know whether or not you're reaching your goals and if your targeted initiatives and strategies are having the effect that you believe they are. So number four, implementing evidence-based and best practice interventions. What does that even mean? What we do know is that advocacy to improve policies or systems that promote safe driving are very effective. And this doesn't just mean changing laws at the state or at the local level. Changing company-wide policies on seatbelt use can also be a successful intervention. So now that you've seen the 5-part structure of what it means to have an effective injury prevention program, let's look a little bit more deeply at what it means to implement evidence-based and best practice interventions for motor vehicle. So what does it mean? It means advocating to improve the policies or systems that promote safe driving. And when we say policy, we like to refer to it as having a big P or a little p. It doesn't just mean changing the policies at the state or at the local level, changing those laws. It can mean changing policies within an organization, like a seatbelt policy while employees are driving on the job. B, support the enforcement of existing laws. Laws are only as effective as they are enforced, because otherwise the public doesn't know or doesn't recognize that they need to follow the law. So supporting seatbelt or impaired driving enforcement time periods, or enforcing graduated driver's licensing outside of local high schools are one way to implement that extra enforcement. And C, community education efforts with appropriate dosing. And what do we mean by appropriate dosing? Educational efforts are not proven to be effective when they occur only one time. What we know to be true of the human brain and learning is that we need repeat of the content and the information over time so that we have been exposed to the same information repeatedly and have a sufficient knowledge base to be able to begin changing behavior. So what can community education efforts include? You can educate the public about the current laws. Most parents, as we've seen in recent surveys, are not aware of graduated driver's licensing laws. Many people aren't aware of the seatbelt laws and how they changed in different age groups. Child passenger safety is another area for education within the community. Impaired driving, specifically when it comes to marijuana, is a significant education need for Colorado, and cell phone use is also important, particularly among teens. You can also educate your community about best safety practices that may be stronger than the laws. For instance, we know that curfews starting at 10 p.m. are more effective for teen drivers who are first learning the rules of the road than a midnight curfew. Currently, Colorado's curfew is set at midnight, so you can work with parents to inform them and educate them repeatedly and over time about the effectiveness of a 10 p.m. curfew to reduce the likelihood of a fatal crash. And lastly, you need to target the right audience to influence behaviors. For example, parents. Since we know that enforcement of graduated driver's licensing laws can be difficult since officers may not be able to recognize the exact age of a teen driver, enforcement really does start at home. So if you target parents with your educational efforts, they can help improve graduated driver's licensing enforcement before the teen ever leaves the house. On this slide, we've provided some sample objectives of what your program could implement at the local level that would be aligned with best practices. A, to increase the levels of coordination or collaboration that supports the implementation of evidence-based programmatic and policy strategies. B, increase local support for strengthening Colorado's motor vehicle safety policies. And again, that can be organizational or statewide. C, law enforcement officers will report increased knowledge and willingness to issue citations for current motor vehicle safety laws. D, drivers or parents will report increased knowledge, awareness, and motivation to comply with the existing laws, such as seatbelt or impaired driving laws. E, reduce the incidence of whatever risky behavior you're hoping to prevent.
I thought that was helpful, actually.
Okay, do we want to take a quick look at our problem identification section one more time to kind of refresh ourselves on what we're focusing on?
I think that's a great idea. Let me go to it here.
Okay. So just a recap, in the problem identification section for Fake County, we decided that our emphasis area would be young drivers and that the performance measures we would most likely be impacting are reduce the number of drivers aged 20 or younger involved in fatal crashes. And if we did that, we would therefore reduce the number of traffic fatalities and the number of serious injuries in traffic crashes. And we had included that we might reduce the number of unrestrained passenger vehicle occupant fatalities because in our program, maybe we will focus on restraint. So our target population is 16 to 20-year-old drivers and passengers in Fake County. And after reviewing data from the problem ID and our local data, we came up with the problem statement that says there is a disproportionate number of youth killed or hospitalized in motor vehicle crashes in Fake County. The number of drivers aged 20 or younger involved in fatal crashes increased between 2008 and 2012. And so overall, we want to focus on young drivers, and that's what our project needs to be set up to do.
Great, and since we're just doing an outline at this point, I went ahead and added in some key points from the guidance of the document just to make sure that we address each of the things that we're going to be scored on and really answer the question that that CDOT's asking us to answer here. In this section, we are going to describe the approach to address young motor vehicle occupant safety. We are going to describe the countermeasures that we select to address this problem, and then whatever program that we're using, we need to make sure to specify this specific dosage. And what dosage means is just how often is a program delivered. This is really a little bit more applicable to if you're doing school-based programs or other more curriculum-based programs where, what we know from Allie's video is that one-time interventions don't usually work. And so you have to have a multi-component program, or you have to have something that is sustained over time. So dosage for, say, a program in the schools might mean we need to deliver this program for 10 weeks in order to really get the dosage we want to see the effect. So we need to make sure to mention dosage if we do that kind of program. So I just stuck that in there for now.
Okay. So let's go to the countermeasures that work.
Okay, so here is the countermeasures that work document for 2013, and you can get to this link right from CDOT's application guidance itself. That's what we did here. And the first thing, after all the disclaimers and stuff like that in this report and who wrote it and what it covers, you get into a table of contents. And so we know that young drivers, which is what we're focusing on, is here on page 8. And so this will give us a table of contents for what's contained in that section. So it's very important, I think, Jan, that we read this entire section, since this is what we're going to focus our grant on. Here is the young driver pages, so we just skipped to the section about young drivers, and we're not going to spend time reading this right this second, but we'll make the assumption that Jan and I read all of this. You can see that the overview, they've got some data. This data is a little older than what you'll find in the problem identification report, since it's national data and they're generally a little bit behind in what they report, but it's consistent. So you can certainly see this is also, all national data and won't be Colorado specific. So, it's something to look at. So let's just look at this section here. This talks about young driver characteristics, and I highlighted a couple things here that we might really want to draw our attention to. We know that young drivers are inexperienced because they're just learning to drive, and that they're also immature. So whatever we choose for a program, we probably want to consider something that's going to address these characteristics. Here, under the strategy section, you see that graduated driver's licensing addresses both inexperience and immaturity of young drivers. So it's good that Colorado already has a graduated driver's license law. I think we need to think about strategies that we can use to support and enhance that law based on what we learned from Allie's video.
Okay.
I also highlighted here, parents play a key role in their teenagers' driving. Parents can be really important because they also support the graduated driver's license law. They are actually written into the law as being the people that have to provide instruction for the minimum supervised driving practice. And then they also, I know from reading here, they're really sometimes the only enforcement that happens if law enforcement isn't really able to to be everywhere all the time. Parents really are responsible for enforcing the law at home. So I think they would be a good target audience for our programming as well.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because we had learned that there's that parent course online, and that would get at both parent education and it's all related to GDL and increasing people's knowledge about the GDL laws.
That's a great idea. We should definitely incorporate that. Skipping to the countermeasures that work section, you can see here that graduated driver's licensing receives 5 stars. So if we're able to craft some objectives that really help us get at supporting the graduated driver's licensing law that we have, and maybe even looking at data and drawing some community support for even strengthening graduated driver's licensing in our community might be the way to go, since that's a 5-star rating. That would probably give us 5 points at least in this section, and I bet we could get some more points as well if we write it well. So that, I think, is a really good strategy. And then under here you see that there's some different components of graduated driver's licensing. I think we'll probably just look at it as a global whole. We have all of these components in our licensing. I did read somewhere, though, that there's new guidance from MAP 21 that's really stronger than our laws in Colorado. And so maybe there is some ways to improve our laws, and maybe some of the data that we're collecting at the local level will help support that at some point.
One of those differences is the curfew hours, right?
One of the differences is the curfew hours, and actually, Allie mentioned that in her video, that, nighttime driving restrictions in Colorado are midnight to 5 a.m., but the MAP 21 guidance says 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. So that might be something to consider. We could even work with local people if we wanted to see if there was support locally for just doing a local ordinance rather than a whole state law and those types of things. I also see here that driver's education receives 1 star. That's a little bit of a surprise to me. We don't really have great connections with our driving schools in Fayette County, so probably that's not an audience that we would really work on anyway, though it is a component of the graduated driver's license law. So I think maybe they're just looking at education as its only intervention and not in combination with other things.
Okay.
Parents, so parents gets a 2-star rating, so teaching parents roles in how to help them learn how to teach their teens to drive, as well as making sure that they know the law to support that enforcement. And then here's information about law enforcement, and maybe we can look into working with our law enforcement officers to really support the graduated driver's license law and to enforce it here at home. So it sounds like that we have selected as our strategy maybe a multi-pronged approach. We want to support graduated driver's licensing and really work towards that. So we may want to come up with some program that really reinforces graduated driving license concepts or some aspects of graduated driver's license laws, like passenger restrictions or something like that in the schools, and really target teens that way. And then we could target parents to really get that parent education and help with the at-home enforcement of the law, and then maybe work with law enforcement as well to see if they can really step up their enforcement of the law in our community. So that way we would have kind of a multi-pronged approach to the problem versus just one of these interventions alone. Before we really dive into the nuances of what we want to do, we'll definitely want to make sure that we read all of these sections really carefully. This is pretty long, but it really talks about the effectiveness and what things cost and the time to implement. So these will all be things that we want to consider.
Well, then we'll know that we're doing the same program that receives 5 stars.
Exactly. In order to continue our outline, Jan, I added some things that I heard during our discussion of the NHTSA countermeasures that work. So let's just go through this and then let me know if there's anything that you would add to this. So we are going to describe our approach to address young motor vehicle occupant safety, and I heard us talking about 3 different strategies. So when we actually sit there and write this project rationale up, we want to make sure that we hit all these points in our paragraphs. So our multifaceted approach is going to have 3 different components: a teen component, and I just based this on what we have done in the past, which is a 12-week high school challenge with all of the high schools in Fayette County to increase teen seatbelt use and compliance with the curfew and passenger restriction elements of GDL. That way we're really supporting the implementation of the law that is already around.
Okay, I think that makes sense.
And then the parent component, there's that online class that the Department of Public Health and Environment put out that is a parent course for GDL that talks about what the law is, and then it even goes a little bit further and talks about best practices for really doing that enforcement at home. So I think it discusses, parents can actually strengthen the GDL law themselves by putting a stricter curfew on their children or restricting the passengers for a longer period of time than what our law actually says. I also think that program has some evaluation components to it, so we may be able to tie that in when we get to the evaluation section.
Okay, and that actually has that parent-teen contract also, so that might be a good interactive, just discussion for the parents to have with their kids.
Great. So I guess the problem here, we'll really have to figure out how to recruit our parents and how we're going to, create some activities under our objective that we'll write about this to really make sure that we're getting a lot of Fayette County parents taking this course.
Okay.
So that will be our challenge. Then I think we should have a law component. Actually, I bet I should have said law enforcement component, which will hopefully really increase law enforcement's knowledge of the GDL law and maybe get their willingness to enforce the GDL component. I don't know, maybe we could get them even to do some sort of pilot project where they do an enforcement campaign around the high school or something like that, and maybe not even issue real tickets, but just show that they're out there to enforce the law, because I know that's really difficult for law enforcement.
Yeah, then they could at least, if they're, stopping teens because they see something, they don't have to give a ticket, but maybe they'll just educate, and that could be a good component.
I think that's true. So I think that captures our main approach, and then obviously we're going to work with other members of our Fake County Teen Driving Coalition to do all of this. So
I think that's really a good approach. The one thing that I think we need to remember to do is go back up to our problem identification, because when we identified our target population, we just said we were working with teens, and now we're actually including the parents and the law enforcement.
True. So let's go back up here. So our target population is 16 to 20-year-old drivers and passengers, and parents of teen drivers.
Yes.
Law enforcement.
Great. I think that's good.
So going back down here, I know the other thing that we have to capture is describing the countermeasures specifically to address the problem. They're probably just looking for us to really state, this is the one we're addressing and here's how we do that. So we may want to work with, when we actually write this, the order of how this flows. But I think that really, we're touching on 3 different countermeasures that really all relate to GDL. So, the graduated driver's license law is the 5-star approach, and in support of that, we're going to do parent education and law enforcement education. So I think that maybe would be good. And actually, I guess we're doing education for youth as well.
Right, and that was the 1-star?
I just looked back at the countermeasures that work document, and at least in the young driver section, they don't mention education for youth, though I do think that in other places they talk about education only interventions generally aren't effective just in and of themselves. I think it's a 1-star. But we'll have to go back and maybe look at that as we tie that in. It's actually not mentioned in this young driver section, so we'd have to go back and see where else it's mentioned. But based on what Allie's video said, I think the key thing here is dosage, which they also are talking about, that we don't want to do a one-time presentation for youth to tell them to not ride in the car with lots of teens. We want to do something a little bit more substantial and multifaceted than that. So our program that we've been doing is a 12-week school-based program, and the teens are actually involved with designing many different components that happen during that 12-week period. So I think that this would probably get us a 5-star 5-point rating on at least that particular question in the scoring criteria.
Okay, I agree.
Thank you for listening to Module 3, Project Rationale. That concludes this webinar. The next webinar in the series will be Module 4, and we'll talk about setting goals, objectives, and activities. And we'll continue our role play so that you can see how we take the rationale we just developed during this webinar and turn them into goals and objectives. Thanks for listening.